Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lesson.
And we're going to be talking about alien rock, which is talking about rock stars and their connections with the extraterrestrials. We're going to talk about presidents and their connections with the extraterrestrials. We're going to talk about the dome off of Malibu under the water, the Malibu Dome, which we think is an ET base. And then before we bring in our guests, I want to read a little bit about them for you. Merrell Fankhauser has led one of the most diverse and interesting careers in music. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and moved to California when he was 13 years old. Merrell went on to become one of the innovators of surf music and psychedelic folk rock. His travels from Hollywood to his 15-year jungle experience with the islands of Maui have been documented in numerous music books and magazines in the United States and Europe. Merrell has gained legendary international status through the field of rock music. Its credits include over 250 songs published and released. He is a multi-talented singer, songwriter, and unique guitar player whose sound has delighted listeners for over 35 years. And he has a new book, which is called Calling from a Star. And this book tells the unique story of one of the founding fathers of surf rock who went on to play in a succession of progressive and psychedelic bands and to meet some of the greatest names in the business, including Captain Beefheart, Randy California, the Beach Boys, Dan and Dean, and there was even a run-in with the notorious Manson family. So he has a new book called From the Star and Signals from Malibu, and let me tell you about Grant Cameron. And Grant Cameron became involved in ufology as the Vietnam War ended in May of '75 with personal sightings of an object which mostly became known as Johnny Red Star. The sightings occurred in Carmen, Manitoba, about 25 miles north of the Canada-U.S. border. Hundreds of other people sighted objects at the same time during a prolonged flap of sightings. And then over the next 18 months, he had many sightings, and he started to study the research of the late Wilbert B. Smith, who headed up the Canadian government flying saucer investigation known as Project Magnet, which ran from 1950 to 54. And then Grant has been, in the past few years, he has turned his research interest into the involvement and actions of the presidents of the United States in the UFO problem. And we're going to talk about his involvement there and his research. And his website is presidentialufo.com. And he has a book called UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informant, a report on government involvement in UFO cache retrievals. And before we bring on Merrell and Grant, Sasha, what would you like to say to our listeners?
Yeah, we are looking specifically in terms of the musical world and the world of U.S. presidents, but larger issues are really raised here about just what is inside and what is outside. What is an extraterrestrial? What maybe people are using different languages to account for Michelangelo and or Melchizedek rather, and Leonardo and Nostradamus, Einstein, and so forth. And that the words for past lives or extraterrestrial influences or interdimensionals or accessing the halls of unmented in meditation. Maybe we're all really talking about the same thing, just using different vocabularies.
All right, and let's bring on Merrell first. Merrell, welcome to our show. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you on board today. And let's just see if Grant is there. Grant, do we have you here?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here, and I'm honored to be on.
Oh, we are just so pleased to have you back, both of you. Okay, let's start with Merrell. What's going on with this new album you have? What was the inspiration about this Signals from Malibu? I guess it's the name of the whole album. It's Signals,
Signals from Malibu. Signals from Malibu, and the lead song on it is titled Signals from Malibu, and it's interesting how I got involved with this. Hadn't recorded in about a year, and I was thinking, I want to do something completely out of the box. And out of the blue, Michael Luckman, the author of Alien Rock, the Extraterrestrial Connection that I'm in, got a hold of me and told me this story about this old radio expert that was in the Second World War, and he was a radio guy that pinpointed where the Japanese were broadcasting from on different islands and atolls. And he was an expert at pinpointing where broadcasting was coming from. And he picked up one night when he was listening and talking to somebody in Australia on his ham radio, he picked up these odd signals that were slightly off the band. And he lives up in the hills in Malibu, California, and he figured that it was coming from a few miles out in the ocean. And he thought, well, that's odd. There's nothing really out there. And he asked around, and nobody said, no, we don't think there's any, naval practices or research or anything going on. And somehow he got in touch with Michael Luckman. And then he sent these signals that he'd recorded to Michael. And Michael said, well, we got to send these signals to Merrell Fankhauser. And they sent them to me. And I started listening to them, and I hadn't even listened to a minute of the signals when all of a sudden this melody came to me. I heard this song, and it was kind of in a instrumental surf sci-fi a la 60s James Bond sound is the only way I can describe it. And I ran in the studio real quick and laid down the first guitar part just so I wouldn't forget it. And then I called the rest of my guys in the band, and probably about 4.5 hours one day and a few hours the next day, we finished the first song, Signals from Malibu, that has these signals going through it. And Michael Luckman posted it on the internet, and then a few shows like yours got a hold of me, and away it went. And I just signed a deal with Gonzo Multimedia, the label I'm on in England, and they're rush releasing it out. Going to try to have it out sometime in March. And that's how the whole thing got started, and then it inspired me to write more songs, and in about 6 weeks, we finished a whole album.
Wow. So it seems that a lot of rock stars have been influenced by extraterrestrials. And I was watching your YouTube that you made in I put it on here. Oh, Calling from a Star. That was in 1978. You shot that in 16 millimeter atop of Haleakala crater. And
right.
So, that's way back then. We weren't really talking about UFOs back then, and there you were.
And that
you
was
were a contactee, or maybe have you looked into it since you've been exposed to this? Do you have any sense that you might have had previous contact, that you had such an interest so early on in 78?
Well, my dad was a pilot, a flight instructor, and a charter pilot, and I learned to fly at an early age at only 14 years old, and I soloed in a Schweitzer sailplane then, because you didn't have to be 18 years old to solo in an unpowered airplane. And I was always interested in things that flew, and I was always asking my dad about UFOs, and he believed that they were real. And then I remember somewhere there in the 50s, I got that little paperback book of Project Blue book. Blue, was that it? Blue?
Yeah.
Blue book. And Alan Hynek had something to do with that. And after that, I was just hooked. So I was always looking for UFOs when I was a kid, and if we were out driving in the desert. And I never saw anything till I moved to Maui, and I'd heard these stories about when Jimi Hendrix had filmed Rainbow Bridge, the movie there in 1970, that they were seeing UFOs hovering around when they were filming. So one night, I went to the top of Haleakala Crater in 1974 with my band, and we were watching the sunset, and this bluish pulsating light came over the crater and started pulsating, and then it split into two more lights, and they formed a tetrahedron, an inverted pyramid, and was shining lights around from one to the next. And the floor of the crater kind of got lit up, and we were thinking, what the heck is that? Because it wasn't a helicopter, there was no noise, and there were some other tourists there. We were up on the hill next to the observatory, and they were all mesmerized by this. And one old Navy guy that was there, he said, I'd never seen anything like that. And we were all baffled, and we watched it for, it was more than 5 minutes. I can't tell. But all of a sudden, it all went back together as one light, and in an instant, shot straight up and disappeared. So from that, I got the inspiration to write the song Calling from a Star that you saw at YouTube. And interestingly enough, a filmmaker, Charlie Booth, who's worked on a lot of movies and things now, he was a young guy back then. He and his wife just visited me here last weekend, and we were talking about how amazing that whole time was, and how we went back up to the top of the crater, and we filmed me singing up there. And when we were done shooting, this man in a blazer, blue blazer jacket, dressed very straight, came up, flashed some kind of a badge, and wanted to know if we had filmed the domes that were then now up on the rim of the crater.
On Haleakala, yeah.
Yeah. And something else in the floor of the crater that we could never figure out what in the world they didn't want us to get on film that was in the floor of the crater. Well, he took us in the observatory, and as you saw, Janet, I was dressed in this white flowing robe, and all the tourists that were in there at sunrise kind of looked at me very strangely, like, who is this guy? And they took me and Charlie in this office, and we had to show him, I showed him my Hawaii driver's license, and he showed him his Detroit driver's license. And they really wanted to confiscate the film, and we convinced them that it had already gone down the mountain on the truck. And then Charlie was saying, well, you know, a lot of clouds came through and obscured Merl, and we really didn't get anything usable. Well, we made it away with that, and it's been shown on TV. It was shown on TV nationally in different stations in 1978, and then again in the 80s, and now again in the 2000s, and we decided, well, what the heck, let's put it on YouTube. And it was a great experience, and I'm glad we got to do it. But the whole thing about the domes, I know they had some sort of a laser in there that people would see, you know, shooting off, bouncing things, tracking satellites and stuff. And, you know, maybe that's what they just didn't want us to have in there. But it was a great experience, and there it is. And I've titled my new autobiography, Calling from a Star.
Calling from a Star. Well, that's where they have Science City, and the stories are that that's the tip of a underground, probably military base, and people have come out and said that there's extraterrestrials there. So we have all kinds of stories here on Maui, where Dr. Lesson and I live, about that exact spot where you are, that where you tell you start. So
it's also part of the bay, where they fire a series of lasers in sequence to cause a toroid, which bounces off the ionosphere and causes weather and other kinds of disturbances at a right angle.
Wow.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a part of HAARP, HAARP. So,
and I know that there's two buildings, and Charlie Booth and his wife, the filmmaker, actually went in the one building of Science City, because I guess they do let civilians go in there, and they just showed them it was a laser tracking device. But the other side is NASA and the Air Force, and they won't let anybody go in there. You got to have a clearance to go in there. And he was trying to get into the other dome, but there was no way. So,
well, the other thing that we heard is that there's a weapon that can fire at the ocean for enemy submarines, and the people that have their kids in Kihei School, which is right in the path of this weapon, are very upset about that. But of course, the military denies it.
Wow.
Great. Wow. Somebody keeps hitting their buttons on their cell phone or on their phone. Let's have a quick check-in with Grant. What would you like to say to add to the conversation about yourself and what we're talking about, Grant?
Yeah, well, what interests me is your introduction to Merrell is this whole idea about the fact that he was one of the first people in surf music and psychedelic rock. And I know Michael Luckman has probably sort of looked at this aspect. And I've spent a lot of time, because I have this book coming out, hopefully it's out by April 1st, on inspirations and downloads, on where does music come from, where do inventions come from, where do good ideas come from. And one of the things, when you got Merrell starting this sort of new sort of branch of music, is that not only are musicians interested in music, but the people who start various types of music seem to be really interested. And there's a number of examples that I have sort of in my book that I go through, like Sun Ra, who's one of the first guys who did jazz. I actually believed he was from another planet. You have Patti Smith, who was the godmother of punk rock. Undoubtedly has these abduction type experiences that she talked about. John Denver, particular unique type of music, believed he came from the constellation Lyra. You got Scratch Lee Perry, who sort of invented dub music and reggae music. He was influential in the beginning of that. You have the Moody Blues, had very particular type of music. They, I don't think, deny that they were abducted in 1967. Al Jorgensen from Industrial Rock, he clearly states he was abducted. You have the Beatles, and I think we talked about it. Merrill and I talked about this on one other show about John Lennon. Very unique brand of music, sort of an innovator in rock music. And John had an experience that looks very much like an abduction experience. You have Elvis Presley, and the list goes on and on and on, that people who seem to be at the beginning of a particular type of music, almost like these new types of music are being inspired, that these people are sort of being directed towards developing a new type of music.
Well, I was talking to Sasha before the show, and how do we know that, we don't really know what the influence is. I'm an extraterrestrial contactee, and I always lean towards that. But, we have people that kind of automatically download information through the years. We have these savants, they're children, and they come into incarnations, and they're incredibly gifted. And I know myself, when I write, I'll kind of get into an altered state of consciousness, and then I write a bunch of stuff, and then I go back and read it, and I go, wow, where did that come from? So automatic writing, there's channeling, there's all this information coming through from the experiencers and contactees, and now we have, I'm sure there's a lot of other people that are inspired, and maybe they'll come forth since you're writing this book, and this other book, Alien Rock, is coming out, about what is the inspiration for this new information that's coming in. And so what are your thoughts on that? Anybody?
Well, that's what John Lennon called it, what Grant was just talking about when I met John Lennon at Harry Nilsson's house. We both got into this conversation because I played him my song On Our Way to Hana, which is about seeing 2 UFOs when I was driving to Hana. And he said, what inspired that? And that started the conversation. And he even said, isn't it odd when you get that nervous feeling that something's coming through and you got to get it down before you forget it and it goes away? And he called it automatic writing, just what you said. And we, at that point, that was back in the 70s, we were both baffled, as to where this inspiration comes from. And now, after talking to people like Grant and Michael Luckman, I kind of feel like maybe you do get channeled and you don't even know you're being channeled at the moment.
Yeah. I've got one quote that I just picked up a couple days ago. Bob Monroe, who's identified as the father of modern bluegrass music, said, I ain't never wrote nothing. Those songs was just floating in the air, and I pulled them down.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of these things, like Stairway to Heaven. The claim was that the lyrics were done through automatic writing. You hear these repeatedly over and over again, and it's not just alien stuff. If you take a look at Carlos Santana, he says quite clearly the fact that his inspiration comes from an archangel by the name of Metatron, and that he does this meditation thing where he takes this yellow legal pad, he sits facing the wall, he lights candles, he meditates, and he said that's where his inspiration came from. And he tells this famous story, I think it was 1997, where he gets this download of the fact that he has not been in music for a long time. And the message he gets from Metatron is, we're going to put you back on the airwaves, and we're going to put some of the top musicians together with you, and you're going to give this message of the oneness of the universe and all this, the sort of the new age message. And he said, as soon as this happened, he started getting phone calls. He got phone calls from Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20, who clearly says he was abducted. He gets a phone call from Eric Clapton, who wrote the music for Communion, whose son is running around, Michael Lee Hill, who's running around now. He claims to be his biological son, who claims a lot of UFO contact. And so he started getting all these phone calls from these various musicians who say, we don't know why we're calling you, but we feel that we have to do something with you. And in 1999, 2 years after he gets this download message that they're going to put him back on the airwaves, he puts out the album Supernatural, which sells
fantastic.
30 million albums, wins 8 Grammy Awards, and so suddenly puts him back in the spotlight. And so you see this kind of download thing, whether it's coming from spirits, whether it's coming from aliens. I sort of look at it as coming from sort of a non-local material world where all types of stuff comes from. And you can even go back to Mark Twain. Mark Twain said 99% of everything is plagiarism. And the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. Everything has been done before. It's almost like it's there, and it's almost like you can sort of, if you can get yourself into sort of an altered state, you can pick up on this kind of stuff. And I believe that musicians like Merrell are right-brained, or their right brain is running the show, and their left brain ego is they can cut that left brain ego out, and the right brain is able to tap into this sort of non-local area where all these songs are and download these songs.
An interesting thing, Grant, if I can interject there, is that what you're saying, I never even thought about that very much. You know, I was just so involved in writing one song, and you finish the album and go on to the next. In 1 year, my sister gave me this astrology book. It's a well-known big astrology book, about as big as a phone book, and I looked at myself in there. I'm a Capricorn, and my birth date and time and everything, and it said I was from Mu Sagittarius. And that blew my mind, because I had done all of these studies about the lost continent of Mu since the mid-'60s, and I went, what? Mu Sagittarius? And then another thing that recently blew my mind is there's an Indian casino just south of here, and sometimes I play it at different places in the area. And the Indian tribe, one of the elders, claimed they knew about this anomaly, or building, as he called it, off the coast of Malibu for hundreds of years. And he said they used to fish off of it when the ocean level was down. And then he says, you know, that's part of the lost civilization of Mu. And I got goosebumps. I went, this stuff is all connected. And it just makes me even more curious, you know, as to how it all really is connected. And maybe you guys are all really onto something that I haven't even thought about. I knew this inspiration was coming from somewhere else, but I could never really say, aha, that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, you and I had once talked about this before. You can maybe sort of talk about the stories. John Lennon talked about the fact that he had a tape recorder, kept it by the bed all the time, and so did the Rolling Stones. What's the name from the Rolling Stones? Had a tape recorder by his bed, and I believe you have the same practice.
I do the same thing, and I have the yellow legal pad there, too.
and maybe you could tell the story, like John Anderson from Yes talks about the fact that he gets songs in dreams, and Paul McCartney has talked about his dream songs, and so maybe you can tell your story. You've had stories of songs that came in dreams.
Yeah, that's true. Off of my 1976 Maui album, I wrote a song called La La Does the Boo-Roo, and that was in a dream when I was recording with my band in Los Angeles, and we went to this mastering studio, and the guy was mastering this song that we wrote that was called Ballad of Brother Lou. Well, when we got to master, it was a different song, and he put a label on it that they put on these acetates to identify it, and it was La La Does the Boo-Roo. And I went, hey, you got the whole title wrong. It's Ballad of Brother Lou. And he put it on the machine and played it and said, isn't this the song? And it was this beautiful instrumental. And I went, oh, wow. Well, I woke up and wrote the song down and played it as fast as I could. And I got that totally out of a dream.
Yeah. And that's where John Lennon was telling you got to make sure you write it down before you forget it, right? Or before you lose
Exactly. Or if somebody else plays a radio or a TV or something else in the room, it'll kind of distract you and it'll go away. And I remember John saying that was one of the most frustrating things for him, that it took too long to get in the studio with the Beatles to record a song. He didn't want to record anything that was older than 2 weeks long, poem.
Wow.
Because he said it lost its freshness, and I know exactly what he meant. If you can get that pure inspiration recorded somehow when it first comes through, and that's one of the things that made me move back to the mainland after living on Maui for 15 years, because I wanted my own studio, and I have that now. So if I get inspired in the middle of the night, I can just run in there and push a button and capture it.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you were saying something, Grant, about they're in a higher state of consciousness or altered state. Do you think that might be what was behind the 60s use of a lot of the musicians' use of drugs, of psychedelics, to maybe get in contact with that, maybe the extraterrestrials?
Oh, absolutely.
Any ideas on that?
This is one of the main theories that I have now, and it's really been ignored by science. It's known in neurology, but it sort of is not played big because it doesn't really fit into the material worldview that science tries to push. And that is the fact that you have a left brain and you have a right brain. You don't have one brain, you have two brains. It's quite clear because in the 1960s, they did these experiments on people who had epilepsy, and they would cut the cord or the fibers between the two brains. And the right brain and left brain do exactly opposite things. The right brain is the sort of the ego brain. It's the one that says, I'm in charge of everything here, and I'm rational, and I'm logical, and all this sort of stuff. And the right brain is sort of the creative brain. Musicians have that kind of brain, and that's where you have this sort of thing where if you take, for example, psychedelic drugs, people always describe the fact that their ego dissolves. Well, that is left brain. Left brain is dissolving. Or if you got meditation, it says, well, we're trying to quiet the mind. You're not trying to quiet the mind. You're trying to shut the left brain down, the one that does all the talking when you're trying to meditate. It's the one that is the physical brain. It's the one that sort of gets you off track. And what you're trying to do is log into that right brain, cut their left brain out, whether it's through meditation, psychedelic drugs, chanting, drumming, whatever, and use that right brain, which a lot of very creative people either are able to tap into the right brain or they're very right brain creative. And John Lear, or John, what's his name? Roger Lear, who did all the alien abduction. Remember, he was taking out all the the implants and stuff like that. When he was asked, he said, alien abduction people, what's the one thing that's common? He said, I know in all my experience, there's only one thing common about all alien abductees, and that is they're all right brain creative people. So you keep coming back to this right brain thing. Psychics are right brain dominant, and it's the ability to shut that left brain out. And that's why I think a lot of it comes just before you go to sleep, when you're going from the waking state to the sleep state, or it comes during sleep when that left brain is basically sent out for coffee. And that's why when you get savants, they're able to do these massive calculations. Even though they can't multiply 4 times 7, they can do one 6-digit number against another 6-digit number and give you the answer. This is all telepathic. That's because all savants and all autistic savants have left brain damage. Their left brain is badly damaged, and the right brain is doing all this stuff. The right brain and the left brain are two entirely different things, which I unfortunately, science really doesn't acknowledge this. They keep talking about the mind, the brain. There actually are two. And I think once you learn to block out the left brain, you can be very creative. You can pick up stuff. And I think that's what's going on, is the right brain is tapping into some field where all this material is being held.
I think you're very right, Grant, because my left eye, ever since I was a child, I haven't been able to see out of very well. And I have a muscle problem in that eye, and the eye drifts and wanders. So I can identify totally with that. It almost seems like that part, and I'm very good at meditating. And when I meditated with the Tibetan monks, and the left part, I can just shut it down completely. And I do agree. I feel, because I can see better out of my right eye, and I can just feel that, the right brain is where the inspiration is channeled in. It's like the antenna is there.
Yeah.
If I may, it's really interesting. From my perspective, you have more brains than that. First, you have an automatic set of reptilian-type responses in your brain stem, and over that you have an emotional brain, the limbic system. Then above that you have a cortical system, which is logical, mainly on the left side, and holistic on the right. And between them you have what's called the corpus callosum, where you can center yourself and embrace both the logical and the intuitive. But beyond all that, you also have a pituitary, a pineal brain, which can develop by meditation. And when you go to a place that has powerful Earth gravitational telluric waves, it shuts off the usual things that stimulate your intellect, which most people identify with and say, that's my sense of I or ego. But I think that it's a spurious dichotomy from the get-go that there's inside and outside, and we are not the flesh in which our souls are encased, and we seem to be hitting a cloud, as it were, of Akashic records when we meditate. I've been with hundreds of people on the holotropic breathwork who have been just this deep meditative technique and also psychedelics, and they all reach creative spaces. But part of it is they honor their intellect rather than try to diss it entirely. That's my opinion.
Yeah, you've done a lot of work in this area where I think you've got some expertise in terms of in this field of how this actually works. That people, I think, sort of just assume, there's the brain, there's a mind, and it doesn't go beyond that. And unless you start to actually go to what's actually going on, it becomes very hard to figure out what's going on. But I think once you start understanding how the mind, the brain, and everything works together, the limbic system and all this sort of stuff, then you start to understand what might be going on with all these different types of inspirations. It's not just musicians. With me, I go through all the Nobel Prizes that came in dreams or that came in inspirations, and quite a few of them in scientific stuff. And music is only part of it. There's as Twain said, I'm basically, when you come right down to it, everything is basically inspired. I mean, there's you're copying from nature. Like we'll even copy something from nature, whether it's biological or whatever, and get a patent on it and then say we invented it. Well, it was already in nature already. All we're doing is basically copying what's in nature. So Twain said basically it's all copied, that we're just sort of instruments, and we sort of funnel it in, put a patent on it, and collect the money.
Very good.
Yeah.
Janet?
Yep.
Sorry.
Hello,
sorry.
Janet, are you there?
I'm sorry. I had myself on mute so you wouldn't hear me drinking my tea. Perhaps the cultural creative people, the people that are creative, have this right brain open. It's like they have their hailing frequencies open already to the to the extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, and that's why they might have more contact than other people that are closed-minded. It's like I've had experiences with ghosts all my life, and I see that they can see me seeing them. And who keeps hitting their cell phone? Stop it! I keep hearing this button or this sound come back. Anyway, that's just what I'm getting from this is that the creative people, and it might be just people that are creative, like you said, if you're a writer or other people besides rock stars. So, okay, that's fascinating. Who wants to take the ball next?
I could sort of mention another couple that sort of go again to this thing. This is very important. When I lecture, I describe some of these, like the whole thing with J.K. Rowling with the 7 books of Harry Potter. She describes this download experience she has, and it happens on a train going from Manchester into London, where all the 7 books of Harry Potter come to her in an instant. It's just an instant download, and she talks to. She does an interview with Oprah, where she's talking about this fact that it's flowing into her head. She has no pen to write this stuff down, and you have all these things. The Wizard of Oz came in an instant download. This happens over and over and over again, and it's something that I think we should spend more time looking at. It basically shows that that we are not just physical beings. It's not just a random, meaningless world. That there is another whole aspect to reality that we have sort of ignored, and where people who tap into it have become very successful at what they do.
So are these people or beings or ETs, whatever they are, trying to influence humanity? They are succeeding. And if so, what is the message we're getting overall? If we look at all these influences, are they just trying to raise our consciousness? Is there an agenda? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I've got some ideas. I write about it. You get this idea about oneness. The Beatles wrote about it in some of their lyrics. This idea of oneness, about the fact that the anti-war move from fear to love. These are some of the messages. One of the ones that I'm doing right now, I can't really talk about it yet, but it's basically, I even came across two contactees who actually both were downloaded a formula and told about the cure to cancer. And I have said that I'm going to try to get these two people regressed. I think it's worthwhile to see if these two formulas agree. They both describe the same alien. They both describe this formula that comes out of the wall. It's a 3D holographic formula. And the one guy, just before he was given this formula on the cure to cancer, is asked the question about God. He said, I really wasn't interested where the aliens came from. I really wasn't interested in that kind of stuff. All I wanted to know is, what's your concept of God? And he said, the tall, gray alien turned to him and said, we are one with the one who is all. And that's the basic concept that you get in a lot of lyrics, in a lot of songs, and a lot of music. So I think you're getting that kind of stuff. But I think we're sort of being moved along, in particular by the aliens. We're being moved past the nuclear weapons, past war. We're giving these sort of ideas. And if you look at the UFO history, you'll see that it has changed. It is not the same thing. I mean, flying saucers didn't start till 1947. Then you had green fireballs. You had Foo Fighters. They stopped. They started. It's a pattern of things happening and stopping and happening and stopping, as if we're sitting there watching someone turn the pages of a book. I think we are getting inspiration and help from spirits, from non-local entities, from, we talked about James Hurtak. He had this whole experience in 1971 where he's taken into the universe and he's shown all this stuff in the universe and how it works. This happens just unbelievable amount of time, and I think it's been ignored. And that's the book I'm trying to come out with. It's called Inspirations and Downloads, Where Good Ideas Come From. And I basically point out that basically, when you come right down to it, almost everything's a download.
So, Grant, do you think there are good and bad aliens? Because one time when Michael Luckman and I were on Coast to Coast, he mentioned that he thought bad aliens were influencing the heavy metal groups. And I said, Michael, I don't know if you should have said that or not, but I just wonder about that. Are there aliens that are really all good? Because if you remember in those 1950s sci-fi movies, the aliens were always portrayed as bad guys.
Yeah. I think that's American foreign policy coming in there. That's American cultural influence. It's the same idea. It's the left brain, right brain thing. The left brain is separation. And one video I suggest everybody read. It just totally influenced my life. It's Jill Bolte Taylor. Jill Bolte Taylor was a neuroanatomist from Harvard University. She was 37 years old, and it's the second most popular TED Talk ever given. And she talks about this experience that she has at 37 years old. She wakes up, she's got this horrible pain in her head, and what happens is she has a hemorrhage, a major hemorrhage in her left brain. And she talks about the left brain going offline, coming online, going offline, and for 4 hours the left brain's going off and on, and she's talking about being in the left brain, then she's in the right brain, then she's in the left brain, she's in the right brain, and eventually the left brain goes offline, and she spends 5 weeks in the right brain. Her left brain is completely shut down. She has this operation, and it takes her about 8 years to recover. But she says she spent this time in the right brain. She was in nirvana. She had a total enlightened experience. There was absolutely no fear whatsoever. And she maintains that the left brain is separation. The right brain is basically oneness. So when I describe this whole thing, I say, a lot of it is influenced how we look at it. So we say, because we believe in separation, we believe in a physical world, we believe that it's survival of the fittest, it's me versus you, and of course I'm always the good guy, which means you're going to be the bad guy, which means if you get my way, I got to kill you. And it's this American foreign policy idea that everybody's an enemy. And so when I tell this story, I had this download experience. That's how I got into this. In 2012, I had this major download experience in Phoenix, Arizona, watching this lecture, where I suddenly get the idea, forget about the nuts and bolts, forget about the spacecraft, forget about all that stuff. It's consciousness. The whole thing is consciousness. And I go off on this thing, and I give my first consciousness lecture in Phoenix, Arizona in 2013. I'm approached secretly. This woman wants to meet with me. She comes and she meets with me, and I have no idea what she's going to talk about. And eventually in the conversation, she's talking about remote viewing. She's working for the government, all this stuff. And then she tells me, she says, oh, and I flew the craft last night. And I said, you what? And she said, I flew the craft. I said, like you flew the flying saucer? And she said, yeah. And this woman is in her 70s. I said, you flew the flying saucer? How do you do that? And she said, you do it with your mind. And as soon as she said that, I understood why they wanted this woman to talk to me, is that I'm talking about consciousness, this whole idea that that's what it's about. The aliens are telepathic. They're totally telepathic. That's what makes them different from us. And because they're telepathic, they have this right brain. They have pure telepathy. They understand how consciousness works. So she tells me this whole thing. So when I lecture, I always say, you believe in good aliens, you believe in bad aliens. If you believe in bad aliens, explain to me why they're allowing people to fly the flying saucer. And I had 24 people in the first year come to me and say, I've flown this craft. And I would always say, hang on, how do you fly the craft? And nobody said anything different. They all said the same thing. You do it with your mind. So I say, if you believe that the aliens are evil guys that are here to eat us or steal our gold or whatever, why are they teaching people to fly flying saucers? Why are they giving people downloads of mathematics, of all this different type of stuff, of cancer equations and stuff like that? Why are they doing this? If you're a woman in Saudi Arabia, it's illegal for you to drive a car. But if the aliens abduct you, you can not only drive a car, you can fly the flying saucer without insurance and without a license. So you got to look at this thing and say, why are the aliens doing this? And one of the things that's happened is there's a group called Free, which one of the board members is Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon. And this is a group that has done a poll of experiencers. It's set up to support experiencers, UFO experiencers, and they have 440 people. And I'm in one of the people that's going to be allowed to interview people in the group of this 440 who have answered the question that they have been on a ship. The question is, have you ever been on a ship and come off the ship with something you didn't have when you went on? Like, for example, a scientific invention, a download of mathematics and stuff like this. And the percentage is extremely high. I can't say what the percentage is. It's extremely high, the number of people who are claiming this. So the whole thing is, if they're evil, why are they downloading all this type of stuff? The more I look at it, the less I believe in evil and evil aliens.
Well, that's great. I root for the good aliens, but I look at what Merrell said, and the author of Alien Rock, Michael, said, are there bad factions? It could be that there are bad factions, because if you look at music as programming, there's a book called Music Through Time by Preston Nichols. It talks about the programming that they were putting in music, and if you have songs that have negative programming, or they're talking about war, they're talking about violence, where is that coming from? And that's when I can't listen to rap music when they're talking about kill, murder, and they're swearing. I mean, I can't even listen to it because I'm so into the spiritual realm. But that music is out there. I come across people and they're listening to it, they're playing it in their where's all this coming from?
Okay, let me make a comment, because I was when I give a lecture in Boulder, Colorado, I was when I give this lecture about the aliens influencing music, I was attacked. I couldn't believe this is Boulder, Colorado, because I call it Consciousness, Colorado. I mean, it's very sort of uplifting. It's like everybody's into the environment, everybody's into health food and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly this thing was, no, this is not aliens. This is the devil. And I went, wow, I can't believe this. And they said the devil is behind modern music. And when I started looking at it, I came from a very religious family. I don't attend church, but I'm very spiritual. My mother was a church organist for 40 years. My father built theater organs. My sisters had a group where they toured. They were a spiritual group. They toured and they played and stuff all over the place. And so I grew up in this. So I said, well, I mean, if the devil, if there's evil in music, well, let's go back to the my mother's music that's played by Bach and Beethoven and all this sort of stuff that's played in church. And I said, well, let's see if there's if the same thing is going on. It's the same thing. If you look at Mozart and all these guys, they're all talking about being downloaded, about the music coming from somewhere else. It's the same thing, different day. So when I looked at it, it's basically the same thing. It's like your music, whatever you grew up with, it's God's music. Your kids' music is evil. It's always the same thing. It's like other people's music is bad. And when I looked at it, I was told the same thing. It just started with heavy metal music. And I said, no. I grew up at the time when Merrell put out, Wipeout and songs like that. I remember in the 60s, it was like, this is demonic music. And people who can go back, if you look back at Elvis Presley was considered to be playing demonic music because he had a black influence. He was using black rhythm, and everybody knew that the black music was satanic. And they told the story about the crosswords and how the black music arrived. And blues was considered satanic music. Jazz.
So was jazz. Remember, they used to preach that the jazz music was the devil's music. And that's why one of my best bands, Moo, broke up, because the other guitar player and the drummer both converted to Seventh-day Adventists, and they believed that the music and the music business in general in L.A. and New York was the devil's work, and they quit.
Yeah.
And that you see that a lot, Grant. That's
I'm not talking about that level. I understand that level. Every generation rejects the next generation's music, and then their music.
I'm with you though too, Janet. I don't like rap music and negative lyrics.
Yeah, but if you think of as what you're taking in is programming. Whatever you listen to, you're programming that. That's like eating really the worst junk food, because it's talking about, it's just like watching movies that are negative. You start getting desensitized to violence, and there is and Sasha, you should speak to this, about the correlation between violence and the programming you take in. Are you there, Sasha?
Oh, yes, it's perfectly apparent that when people hit their children physically, and you see a surfeit of violence in the media, you're more prone to violent crime and going to war. And also, the more you're denied free sexuality, the more likely you're to engage in those things. But, from my perspective, which may be different than everybody else's, it's very important for you to identify with everything in the human condition is within you, too. And you can take things that you think are evil or disrespectful of consciousness and say, what part of me resonates with that, and how is this part being disrespectful of other aspects of my totality? I find it useful first to see just what are your egos, or what do you identify with? What protective and effective selves have you? Do you think you are? And then underneath, and what are how did they come about? How have they served you? And will they let you, with give you permission for you to explore vulnerable and instinctual and spiritual selves that don't usually get out, and let your intellect know you're not throwing you away. I'm just going to put you on a shelf, and you can we'll bring you into later. But I say first you have to identify with what is going on, and these things that you're calling evil are undoubtedly parts of yourself that you haven't developed and come to peace with, I think.
Yeah. One of the questions I always bring up is I say it's like same with whether it's music or whether it's alien abduction or whatever. You got to have the influence of the human mind. I say take a look at life itself. Is life itself evil? Is it a bad thing? Because you're going to get a lot of people will say life is absolutely beautiful. I love it, whatever. And 37,000 people every year in the United States of America think that life is so bad, it's worse than an alien abduction, it's worse than any music, it's worse than anything, and they kill themselves. So because 37,000 people say that life is so bad, does that make life evil? It's got to do with how the person's interpreting what's going on. Everything to me is neutral, and the mind is playing into this and influencing this kind of stuff. So if you take a look at your kids, my kids played this horrible music as well, and so then you look at that generation and you say, well, is this generation evil? Are they all going to become evil? It's the same as you and I, that some of them are going to become evil, do bad things, some are going to do good things, and I think it's just a part of the influence of that age, where the time when in the 70s, it was like you play all these music backwards and it's all satanic. I mean, whether it's the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, and you heard this over and over again. And I think it's, to me, it's a lot of it is the spin we put on it. It's this, the right brain sort of creating this fear, this evil, and manipulating people with it.
Grant, don't you also think, though, you're a product of your environment? Like, take some kid that's in the ghetto and maybe he doesn't even have a good father figure or a mother. This kind of goes along with what Sasha was saying. They're influenced in a way that they can get into this negative genre, if you will.
Well, hold that thought. We'll be back in just 5 minutes. So thanks for listening. See you in 5.
First of all, when you come up with you again, my phone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson. And before we go back to our show with Merrell Fankhauser and Grant Cameron, I want to remind everybody that Revolution Radio is listener-supported. So please do take a few minutes now and go over to the donation button and donate whatever you can, $1, $5, $15, $20, $100, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. We do thank you very much for your donations. Your donations help us bring you these programs. And thank you very, very much. Before we bring back Merrell and Grant, Sasha, Dr. Lesson, are you there? And do you have anything to say about
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, we were last talking about evil and the demonic. And from my perspective, any impulse that we have that's ignored and not integrated becomes demonic. So if you hold in your anger and never ever express it, you might go postal and shoot everybody in McDonald's or something. But if you can integrate anything that you think is demonic, even within yourself or within the culture or the world, you have a chance of really centering yourself. And evil, that is what bugs you in the world, the disrespect for consciousness and the form it takes, is what gives you meaning in your life. If you can't stand chaos, your purpose becomes order. If you can't stand ugliness, your purpose becomes beauty. If you don't like violence, your practice becomes peace. And so, for example, if you have a violent impulse, you have to ask, what does the part of you that has violent impulses really need? And if so, you'll get to something that's
consistent with your inner ecology and the ecology of the world. So that's my take, anyhow.
Okay. So there's two things I want to cover in this next hour, and there's many other things we can cover. But I do want to talk to you, Merrell, about your book, Calling from a Star. And Grant, I want to talk to you about presidents and their ET connections. So I don't know where do we start first, but Merrell, you want to tell us a little bit about your book, I guess. We'll start with you.
Yeah, even in the 70s, people said, you've led an unusual and an adventurous life that's not like most rock stars that just hang out in the studio and on stage. In 1973 is when I moved to Maui because I was interested in the theory of the lost continent of Mu, and that it was, rumored that the Hawaiian Islands were once part of. And I did find several ruins, as we mentioned before on your other show, that are still unexplainable. Pillars in the East Maui jungle. There's a pyramid in the Haleakala crater, and then on the side of the island, going out of the Kaupo Gap past La Perouse Bay, and there's all of those ruins of buildings that are under that 890-year-old lava flow there. So I go from my childhood and from my ancestors that came from Switzerland. There's even a village in the Swiss Alps called Fankhauser, and in the 1800s they migrated to the United States, and a lot of them settled in Ohio and parts of Canada, and others went on to Australia. So I talk about all of that history and then how I got influenced to start playing music when my dad bought me a ukulele when I was about 11 years old, and he played guitar, and my mother sang in big bands. And so there was always music in the house, and by the time I was 13 years old, I was writing little songs just for my own amusement. And then we were discovered in Pismo Beach at the largest dance hall on the Central Coast, the Rose Garden Ballroom, in 1962, and Delphi put out our Wipeout album that became a hit. And of course we didn't know anything about copyrights or contracts or anything, so unfortunately we hardly made any money at all until that copyright expired in 1994. And by then I was practically a music attorney, and I went in and recopyrighted the whole album and helped all of the band members get their fair share when Warner Brothers bought it from the original company and re-released it. And it's actually now, Janet, I'm over 400 songs. The 250 songs is the the website just hasn't been updated, and I've been playing music for over 50 years now, and I couldn't believe it. A guy in England was interviewing me for Shindig magazine, and he said, "You've been doing this for over 50 years." And I counted backwards to 1962, and I went, "Oh my God, it really has been that long." And he said, "Well, what's more important than that," he said, "is the fact all you've done, but you're still alive." And I went, "You're right."
There you are. Well, I learned to play Wipeout when I was 15 years old back in the 60s. That was one of the first songs I learned to play. So
you played it on guitar?
Yeah, I was playing it. My boyfriend was teaching me, and so we would play together. I wasn't any good, but it was still fun. Here's what you do.
Flash forward way to about the 80s. One time I was driving in from Walo, where I used to live, and I turned by the Haiku Elementary School, just past the Haiku Recreation Center there, and I was hearing this sound, and I pulled over to the side of the road, and it was all of these little ukulele students that were out under the trees there in the school, and they were playing Wipeout on ukulele. And I just went, oh my God, what a moment. I wish I had these neat video cameras that they have now, so I could have, videoed that and or got it on tape or something. And I mean, it was the neatest thing hearing that on about 8 or 9 ukuleles. And some of them were playing the rhythm part, and the other ones were playing the lead melody. Da 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 da. It was just a fantastic moment for me. And now when I read my book, there's so much in it, and so many people I've played with, and so many recordings that I almost can't see how I squeezed it all in one lifetime. So it's available at Amazon.com, and I'm trying to reach this magic number that the publisher told me about. If I sell 5,000, I automatically get on the New York Times bestseller list. Then all the libraries take notice, and they'll buy it. So I'm hoping that'll happen, because there's a lot of stuff I feel young and up-and-coming musicians can learn about it, and how important it is to copyright your songs. And, a lot of people don't want to take the time to do that. And, you'll lose in the end, because they're still song sharks, as we called them back then. And they're just out there looking for uncopyrighted material that they can bootleg.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Grant, what do you want to tell us about the presidents and their UFO connections?
I spent a lot of time chasing the presidents, and the reason I did, it was almost like the inspiration thing. Now I've sort of moved to the inspiration thing that I figure that's where the answer is. Because what happened to me is I had this sighting in 1975, then I had another one. I got the one I was so close I was going to jump on the thing. It was so close. And so I tried to get a manuscript published in the 1970s on the sightings and what we'd seen, and this whole town was infested with these things. They were all over the place, and had to do with the nuclear weapons just south of the border. But anyway, nobody would publish this manuscript, and so I gave up on sightings. I said, this is a total waste of time. I can tell my story all I want. It really doesn't mean anything to anybody else. And so all I wanted to know was, what had I seen? Somebody must have an answer to what I had seen. Somebody must know what's going on here. So that's what I've basically spent my life. Like I was only 22 when this first happened. I sort of gave up my life, gave up a career, gave up anything just to chase this story. I fell down the rabbit hole, and I've been chasing it ever since. And it went from the Canadian government to the former president of Penn State University. This guy had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He knew what was going on. He gave us a few little hints, but really didn't want to talk about it. Dr. Eric Walker. Dr. Eric Walker.
Right. I was in his office one time. We shared that story.
Yeah.
Because I had to deliver a package to him.
Yeah, you told me that. Yeah. Yeah, and he was a co-developer of the homing torpedo. He was an assistant secretary of defense. He was the chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, the top military think tank to the U.S. military. And he basically told us that he'd been at a series of briefings at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that had to do with the recovery of a craft and bodies. So what? Go study something else. You're never going to get to the bottom of this unless you have the mind of Einstein. And so we chased him for about 8 years and tried to get what we could out of him. And he had done some work for President Eisenhower, and it was at that point I was looking for Walker's files, and I went to the Eisenhower library and to the Truman library looking for files for Dr. Eric Walker. And it was at that point I thought, well, the president is the most powerful guy in the world, and if you understand the UFO story and the consciousness aspect to it, you know this is the most important story of all time. So there's nothing even comes close to this. So I said, what does the most important person in the world know about the most important subject? And so I spent, I guess, about 15 years chasing the presidents, and I gather all the stories. And there's some very interesting stories about various presidents and what they saw and things that they did behind the scenes. What I came to the conclusion when it was all said and done is that if I were to sit you down and I were to give you the briefing and I would tell you what's actually going on, you do exactly what the president's doing. I think I've got a lot of compassion for the president of the United States. I sort of realize, I think that the president knows what's going on. I think he's sworn to secrecy like everybody else, and that the president is basically doing the best that he can with what he's got. His hands are tied by Congress, by the Senate, by various things, and I think he's basically just following the rules, the same as everybody else in government. And that's when this idea, the same thing about idea about Kim for evil, and the idea was that there, depending whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're a Republican, then all the Democratic presidents are evil, and they spend their days trying to figure out how to destroy the world. And it was at the end I realized that these are just ordinary people doing the best they can with what they've got. And people would, in the UFO community, it's big to talk about George Bush and the Illuminati and how George Bush is in charge of all this and he's this evil guy. And I said, do you seriously? I show a picture when I lecture. I show a picture of George Bush Sr. and then his sons like Bush and Jeb and all the different, and then all the grandchildren, all the great-grandchildren. It's this massive family picture like anybody else's family picture. And I said, do you seriously think that George Bush Sr. gets up every morning and goes to his office and says, you know what? I got to figure a way to destroy the world for my grandchildren. And that's what it came down to me, this realization that you and I, it comes down to this ego thing. If we believe that there's a separation, that it's all ego, that there's separation, it's us versus, it's me versus you, and everybody thinks they're the good guy. Everybody thinks that they've got the perfect music, they got the perfect political system, that they live in the perfect country, and everybody believes that they're the good guy and everybody else is the bad guy. And that's what I think basically it comes down to, is that every president is the same as you and I. They do good things, they do bad things, they cut corners the same as you and I do, and that they're really no different. That they're tied, their hands are tied with this subject. They really don't want to spill the milk. They realize that a lot of things could go wrong if they release it. And so that's the way in the end, I sort of wrote up the presidents, that they're just ordinary people, the same as you and I. They have a lot of problems on their plate with UFOs, with foreign governments and stuff like that, and that they basically do not want to give up the secret. And it's got to do with this American foreign policy thing, that we're the good guys, we're the Americans, we're God's chosen race, we are in charge of this whole thing, and we don't want to give the technology to Al-Qaeda and to China and Russia, because they're all evil people, and they're going to use it to destroy us. And in some aspects, it's true. If you were to give this technology to ISIS or Al-Qaeda, are they going to use it to make the world a better place, to reduce pollution, or are they going to use it to kill Americans? So if you're the president, you look at it and someone says, they're going to use it to kill Americans, you go, well, they probably are, and so that's why they keep it secret. I have a lot of compassion for the president of the United States after years and years of chasing them around. And the way I came to this was, a lot of times there are very few UFO documents in presidential libraries. And I went to all the presidential libraries, and I'd sit there for a week, and you'd be through the UFO documents in about 10 minutes. So you'd have the rest of the week, you'd have nothing to do. So I would read oral histories, like in every presidential administration, if you're the cook, they bring you in when you're leaving the White House and say, what was it like to cook for the president? What was the president like? Did he ever talk to you? And so you tell this oral history of what it was like to work for the president. And I read all these oral histories of Bush and Kissinger and all these different people. And I realized in the end, they're just ordinary people like you and I. And they have good sides to them and bad sides to them. And the basic thing is, they believe they're saving the world. And everybody thinks they're saving the world. Everybody thinks that they've got the perfect music. And everybody, I think, is doing basically the best they can with what they've got.
So
I wanted to ask Grant a question, Janet, if I can.
Go ahead.
Did you ever find anything about the rumor that Dwight Eisenhower met with aliens in the 50s?
Yeah, I talk about it quite a bit. I went to the library. There was a number of researchers went to the Eisenhower Library, and I spent about a week looking at all the documents and all the cards that were handed out. Like they give thank you cards for this and that. We went through every file, and I knew exactly what a president was. I looked at his minute-by-minute itinerary where he was and whatever, and there is absolutely no doubt that the president disappeared. This is late February 1954, that he disappeared. He was supposed to be with a guy who owned all the bakeries in California, and he was staying at this guy's estate, and they were supposed to be playing bridge, and for some reason they knew the president was gone, and the press secretary...
He went to Edwards Air Force Base, is what I heard.
Right.
That's the rumor, that he was moved to Edwards Air Force Base. He disappeared Saturday evening. He reappeared Sunday morning, and his chief secretary, a woman that worked for him his whole administration, said he hated church. That's when he reappears. He reappears the next morning at church. There's no doubt that the president disappeared. And this comes down to this evil thing again. The way it's spun is that the president traded off the American people in exchange for technology. So they had these evil gray aliens were there, and they said, you can abduct our people, and in exchange you give us some technology, which is absolute total nonsense. Number one, if you've got a gray alien and you sign a treaty with him and he breaks the treaty, what are you going to do? Take him to court? There's nothing you can do. I mean, there's no way you're going to sign a treaty, because the aliens are running the show, and anybody knows anything about the Greys know the Greys do whatever they want. They don't have to take any permission from anybody else. They got the power. So the treaty idea is totally crazy. And the other idea, if you're the aliens, why would you give Americans special technology which you're going to turn around and try to shoot you down? So this is totally crazy. If you look at what actually happened, and this is where I say, if you start looking behind the scenes, you see what's actually happened. If you look what actually happened, if the president did meet with aliens, it was not Greys, it was these humanoid type aliens, because the first people that reported Etherean aliens, like these blonde type aliens. If you take a look at what happened, what I say happened, the aliens told him, you got to stop nuclear weapons. That was the message of the aliens in 1950. You got to stop nuclear weapons. And Eisenhower said, get lost. If you look exactly a week later, after that meeting in February of 1954, you look what happened. The biggest radioactive contamination in the history of the United States occurred on a Pacific island. The Americans were testing a hydrogen bomb, the first one that would be dropped out of planes. It was supposed to be 5 megatons. They misread one of the chemicals, figured it was neutral. It wasn't neutral. It turned out to be 15 megatons. The island that they detonated this bomb on disappeared. The wind was going in the wrong direction. They contaminated 2 islands in the South Pacific. They had to evacuate the people off those islands. The people are still off those islands today. The Americans have paid $250 million in reparations. They contaminated a Japanese fishing trawler. The people that detonated the bomb were on another island 20 miles away. They had to evacuate them. There was radioactive fallout coming down, and they had bed sheets over top of them. They didn't have radioactive equipment. They had to evacuate them. The biggest natural radioactive disaster in the history of the American program took place a week after that test. And so I say, if the aliens did meet with the president, they were saying, stop the nuclear weapons, and the president said, get lost, we're going to go ahead with the test. And it went very, very bad. And that's what happened to me. My first sighting was in the Vietnam War. As the Vietnam War ended, it was 1975, and we couldn't figure out. I went back 30 years later to the guy who ran the airport, this small town. I said, Bob, why were the UFOs in this small town? There's nothing here. There's no industry. There's nothing. And he said, you know why they were here? I said, no, I don't know why they were here, Bob. He said, you know why? I told you why they were here. I said, Bob, I do not know why the UFOs were here. For 30 years, I've not known why I had these sightings in this small town. He said, the nuclear weapons. As soon as he said that, I knew, because North Dakota had so many nuclear weapons. They said that if North Dakota was a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. And in 1975, the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States went operational just south of the border where I had my thing. And this was pre-Star Wars. This is where they were going to shoot the Russian missiles, because the Russian missiles are going to go after the American missiles. They're not going after the cities. They're afraid of the missiles that are coming their way. So all those missiles in North Dakota were targeted, and the Americans built this 300 missiles, small missiles, medium-sized missiles, and they were going to try to shoot down the Russian missiles with this big radar thing. It went operational in 1975. It was shut down at the end of 1975. It was 1975 with this town north of the border, 80 miles from this unit where they had all these missiles, went operational, where we were just infested with UFOs. As soon as you shut down this anti-ballistic missile unit, the UFOs went away, and I said it was like the CIA took the drugs out of the water. There has not been a sighting in this town since 1976. It's all got to do with nuclear weapons, and you start looking behind the scenes, I really start to doubt that the aliens are evil. I think that you look behind the scenes, you see even the Malmstrom. You have this famous Malmstrom case where, they shut down the 10 nuclear missiles at Malmstrom. Well, now we know years later that the guy who was in the silo at the time is a UFO abductee. It's almost like the Russians. Like the aliens had their own guy inside the missile silo when they shut it down. He was a UFO abductee. So you start looking behind the scenes, you see that all the patterns fit. That were I think that whether it's Merrell or myself or whether it's Sasha and Janet, everybody's like a pawn. And we're sort of being moved around, and we're being volunteering for different missions and to do different things. Because if you look at, and I'll tell this last story, and then you can go to another question. But if you take a look at one of the most famous stories of musicians was the Moody Blues, and the Moody Blues clearly were abducted. They talk about this experience coming into London 3 hours late. They have 3 hours missing time. They all talk about it. And don't deny, they draw the alien. And years later, they go to Colin Andrews. Colin Andrews, who invented the crop circles, Colin Andrews is giving a lecture. And they go to Colin Andrews and they say, we want to talk to you. We need to talk to you. And it's Mike Pinder, the lead for the...
I know Mike Pinder, and I recorded with him.
Yeah, okay, and his lead guitarist. So they come to him and they say, we got to tell you this story. And they start telling Colin Andrews this story that before they were born, they remember being in a room and being given instructions that when they are born, they will be musicians and they are to put these lyrics in the song. And Colin said, you could tell it was not a story I made that up, because it was going from the lead guitarist to Pinder to the lead guitarist. And he said, tell them this, and the story's going back and forth. And they're both telling this story that they remember before they were born, the instruction that they had volunteered for this job to be musicians to do this. And I say that is the key part. If this thing goes back before birth, it becomes not a physical problem, it becomes a spiritual problem that we may all have volunteered to do something, to raise the consciousness of the earth, and that we've agreed to go through the river of forgetfulness, and that you agreed to be a musician, you agreed to put this stuff, you agreed to have these experiences, and that we're all playing a role. It's like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, all the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and they have their exits, and each man plays in many roles. That's my sort of take on what actually might be going on.
Wow. There's a whole cult group, too, that believe that George Bush, Senior and Junior, were from the lizard alien race.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever? You probably heard about that. And one of my musicians that thought, everything was the devil's work and was evil, he believed that. He totally believed that. And I said, Jeff, you can't be serious. Oh yeah, he's an alien, bad alien lizard race.
Well, that's David Icke's theory. But I as a contactee, I've met the reptilians, and some of them are nice, and some of them aren't so nice. Just like you have human beings, There's some you want to go have tea with, and others you don't want to be in the same room with. So I think I think it's a climb, just like human beings. Some are nice, but they might get along with somebody else and not me. So I don't take it personally. Yeah, I agree with you that there was agreements. I remember having some agreements coming down here. I've talked to other people about it, and we've had conversations about even just personal relationships. We've had this conversation before we were born, that we were going to come down and have this conversation. So when I had an experience with the extraterrestrials, they kind of showed me all the ships one night. It was like the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. At the end, I started to be beamed up onto the ship. I said, stop, don't make me go unconscious. They set me back down. They said, everything's by agreement. We don't do anything against your will. So I totally agree with you, Grant. Who else wanted to talk? Somebody was talking. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's very interesting that the releases that Len Kasdan has had in his book about the exchange with Serpo, based on what he says is a defense information agency that Kennedy started, is saying that these very people that look like us from the planet Serpo were looking around Los Alamos. They wanted to find out about the atomic bomb and what was being planned there. And it was they who deliberately gave us the anti-gravity crafts so that the Nazis and their allies who won the Battle of the Red Sea in Antarctica in 1947 wouldn't have the jump on the United States. That's the story that we get from the Serpo stuff that I read. And so The aliens, from the reports I get, have been extremely concerned about nuclear contamination of space and our planet and the oceans and everything else.
Yeah, and now it's the environment thing. You get, according to Yvonne Smith, I don't know whether she's exaggerating, but she said literally everybody that she's regressed, when she gets them on the ship, she goes through that period, they are all shown this screen of this environmental disaster scenario of the world, catastrophic environmental damage and stuff like that. And if that's true, I mean, even if half of them are being shown this, I mean, this is kind of a message that we should sort of maybe take a look and see whether there's really something to this, because this is seems to be the nuclear message seems to be have gone to the side, almost like we've sort of got nuclear weapons under control. But then it's this environmental thing, and a lot of people these experiences. There's a lot of these people around. For example, Whitley Strieber talks about the fact that when he put out the book Communion, that a lot of people just sort of immediately knew they'd been abducted when they saw the cover of this book. He got 500,000 letters. And when you take a look at 500,000 letters that a writer gets after writing a book, you can tell there's a lot of people involved in this whole thing. So this is pretty massive, whatever's going on with this abduction phenomena. And a lot of these people are being told this thing about the fact that when the time is right, you'll know what to do, that they're being trained to do this kind of stuff as if something's coming. That and I can't see that it's bad. I mean, if they wanted to take over and eat us, they would have done it. They could have done it any time. They don't need to do this. And then you get this idea that if they're telepathic, they understand consciousness. And if they understand consciousness, they understand oneness, and they understand the whole concept that there is no real physical world. There is, it's everything's connected, everything's a hologram, and that if I kill you, I cut off my own arm. They'll understand that if they're telepathic, and so that's the key part where I really have this problem about aliens being evil, and even these stories about these aliens are fighting with each other. I said, how can aliens fight with each other? This is total nonsense. I mean, if aliens are telepathic, they know what the other guy's going to do. They know where the guy's going to shoot. They know who's going to lose the war. So if you can see into the future, if I can see into the future and I know I'm going to lose the war, why would I have a war? Once you have telepathy, everything changes, because then you can read the other guy's mind. You can't have politicians making up stories and lying and stuff like this. It changes the whole world, telepathy, once everything is out in the open.
What I wonder, Grant, though, when I've been examining this on all levels, are there some extraterrestrials that are more alien? They're just they're humanoid, and they went through the veil just like we have. There might be a whole group that are in the same 3D level of unconsciousness, and then above them are extraterrestrials or higher consciousness. Because I'm dealing with the extraterrestrials of higher consciousness, but I've had stories of people dealing with aliens that are in the matrix, so to speak. They're just from other planets. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've been looking at it.
Okay.
I just want to say one more thing, and then I go back to you. Let me just say one more thing about the disasters. When I was taken on board the mothership when I was 4, and I was at that time I was my eternal self. I wasn't a 4-year-old. I was in a 4-year-old body, but I had my awareness of who I was as an eternal being. I was shown 24 different multiverses. One, of course, was the absolute destruction that I think they're showing the contactees. The piece that I was given is that I am a chooser, and they gave me 24 sample alternatives where I could go. And when they're saying I was a chooser, they're saying you are the chooser. We are all the chooser. What outcome we want to experience, because it all exists. It's like a multi-lane highway. Which road do we want to go down? Which lane do we want to travel in? Yeah. And we are the choosers. So back to you.
Yeah, it's basically, you're being dealt certain cards, and how you play your cards is how it turns out. That it really doesn't. If you have multiple lives, it really doesn't matter how it turns out anyway. If we destroy the world, you go someplace else and do the lesson all over again. But as for this whole thing, that's what the whole telepathy comes down to the download I had in 2012, and that goes to how they get here. And the main argument by science that the fact that there's no ETs is you cannot get here from there. You can't carry enough food. You cannot last long enough. It's going to take thousands or millions of years to get here. And that's what the download I got was. The download I got is 3 things that had I studied my whole life, and I had them, I didn't realize, and they were all just suddenly put together. And the one was the Canadian government. The Canadian government was told by the Americans in 1950 that that mental phenomena was part of the was part of the flying saucer phenomenon. This is 1950. This is before anybody ever talked to an alien. They were told mental phenomena is part of the UFO phenomenon. That's number one. The second thing, and that gets to how do they get here? How do they get from there to here? And the second one was Dr. Eric Walker, this former president of Penn State University. He's being pressured about the control group. How's the control group? Is there just 12 guys? Is it an international group? Who's on the thing? He said, look, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy from England that was interviewing him didn't have an answer to the question, so he answers his own question. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. You have to understand about ESP. And then the conversation went on to something else. And for 30 years, I didn't know what he was talking about. And the last one is the thing, how did they get here? This is the whole telepathy thing. You cannot have lower level things that are coming here with nuclear rockets or whatever. They're all using the same technology. And that was the interview, the statement that was made by Ben Rich. Ben Rich, this is a download I got, was this. Ben Rich is giving this speech. UCLA alumni, engineering alumni. The last slide he shows is the flying saucers. There's 3 UFO people in the room. They're all watching this and they go, wow. I mean, this guy's the head of this Lockheed Skunk Works, the SR-71, the U-2, the stealth fighter. This guy knows everything about the black budget programs. He's on the inside. Why is he showing this flying saucer? He started asking him questions. He said, we've discovered the mistake in the equation. We can now take ET home. We discovered how to do it, and it's not going to take a lifetime. And the guy that asked him the question was Jan Hartson. As he's going out of the building, Jan Hartson, who had a UFO experience when he's 9 years old, 30 feet away in his backyard, is fascinated. His whole life was influenced. He wanted to become an engineer because he wanted to find out how do flying saucers fly. And he goes to Ben Rich as he's leaving the building. He said, Ben, I spent my whole life working on flying saucers. I'm interested. How does the propulsion system work? How do they get here? And Ben Rich said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And he said, well, that means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. And he walks out of the building, gets in his car, and drives away. That's how they get here. They get here using telepathy. That's the whole thing with these people that told me they fly the craft with the mind. You have to understand telepathy to go across time and space. That's how they get here. And if you understand telepathy, you understand the oneness of the universe. You understand that there are no evil. There is no evil people that have to be killed. Everybody's part of the hologram. Everybody's connected. If you kill your neighbor, you're cutting off your own arm. They understand telepathy. They understand the oneness of the universe.
And that's why they have the Moody Blues singing, thinking is the best way to travel.
The fastest way to travel is Moody Blues. That's their lyric. Yeah.
That's their lyric.
Yeah, that's right. And I play that often when I lecture about the Moody Blues had a real insight and a lot of musicians. It's amazing how many were abducted. It's got to be a couple dozen. I don't know how many Mike Luckman has, but I've got a couple dozen. And the chances of 24 major musicians like the head of Kiss and Cat Stevens and John Lennon and all these top musicians being abducted, this is not coincidence. This is a pattern that we should look to and see why is this happening. It's almost like they have a lot of influence over people, and they're helping raise consciousness. That's my personal impression of what's going on.
That's quite right. It says the birth of Elvis was marked by the appearance of a mysterious blue light over his house. It's almost like the Jesus story.
Yeah, and I even got somebody sent me a manuscript. There was actually a manuscript written about Elvis and UFOs, and somebody told me about it, and then somebody knew the guy who wrote it, and they got me. It's a very, very rare book. There's an actual book written on Elvis Presley and UFOs many years ago.
What was Michael Jackson's association?
Michael Jackson, Michael Luckman had talked to Michael Jackson. He knew Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson believed he was from someplace else. Michael Jackson was very clear of the fact that he did not write his songs, that he was basically getting downloads, that he was just a vehicle, and believed he was from somewhere else, the same as Patti Smith believed she was from someplace else. John Lennon believed he had this extraterrestrial origin. And you see these patterns over and over again. And when Michael Luckman wrote his first book, it was like 320 pages or whatever. This is not one or two little stories about musicians. This is a massive book. And then when I started doing the musician, I was doing more the consciousness aspect to the musicians. Why would musicians be influenced, and how does it fit in with downloads from spirits like Carlos Santana claims and stuff like that? Then Mike said, well, I'm going to do the second book. And now he's going to put another book, probably another 300 pages. So you're going to have 600 pages on musicians and alien influence. There's something to this. This is not coincidence.
Right. There is something. I agree. Okay, Merrell, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think it's all very interesting, and knowing something about meditation and ESP, and you know, I think Grant has a lot of good points there. And you know what we know now about black holes and these wormholes that you know they claim they can get into, and instead of like it taking hundreds of years to get from one planet to the next, they know where to go to just transfer themselves. It's almost like Star Trek, you know, when they used to beam me down, Scotty. So it's all very interesting, and you know, I never had any abduction or anything that I can remember, but I do know when that inspiration comes, it's coming from somewhere. It's like you're the receiver, and there's a transmitter somewhere that's transmitting this, and it's, you know, it's very unique, and I think some people have the receiver to pick it up, and some people don't. That's why there's all kinds of different music. There's different kinds of art, you know, painters, and it's very interesting where it all comes from. And I remember so clearly that night with John Lennon. We didn't talk about ETs or UFOs at that point, but he was saying, you know, he was sort of asking me, where do you think this comes from? And when I was meditating with the lamas on Maui, I played the first Western music for Karmapa and the rest of the Rinpoches. And I remember he asked me through the translator, where does the music come from?
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, everywhere. And he said, very good answer.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about this? Because one of the things that musicians I've seen also mention, and I think you had mentioned at one time, is how fast it comes. It's not like it takes you like anything that's really, really good in music, even like Dylan, Bob Dylan, the Blowing in the Wind apparently took 10 minutes to write, where it sort of comes fast and you get it down quickly. And these mostly are the really good songs that come almost like instantaneous downloads.
That's true, Grant. The best songs that I've written, and John Lennon sort of said the same thing, come in 10 to 15 minutes. And I hear the whole thing in my head, complete. I hear all of the parts like it's a finished piece of music, and then I have to go figure out how to play it. What chord do I play with this melody? And I'm writing it down, plus recording it on something so that feeling doesn't go away, and trying to get it down as fast as I can. And that was the interesting thing about those signals, those radio signals from Malibu. It's almost like they were communicating with me, and I don't remember if we talked about the second song that I wrote when I found out that I hadn't listened to all of the signals that were sent to me. There was about 4.5 minutes worth of signals that I hadn't listened to. And so I went out in the studio and sat down at the piano and thought, okay, I'll just play these in the headphones and play along with it and see what comes out. Well, I thought, I better push record just in case. And it's a good thing I did, because I played this whole piano part that I had no idea what I was playing, and I don't consider myself that good of a piano player. And when I finished it, I was kind of aghast at what I had played, and then my violinist, Sal Garza, came over and listened to the track, and I said, yeah, I've got some violin and cello parts I want you to do to this also. And he said, who played the piano part? And I said, I did. And he said, yeah, right. You're a concert pianist. Who played this? And I said, no, Sal. It was like it played me. I didn't play it. And that's the song Messages from the Dome. And that ends the album, Signals from Malibu. So I figured I should open up with the signals and end with the signals. So I can honestly say from my heart that those signals influenced me to write this music. And I thank Michael Luckman for it. And I thank the guy that recorded the signals, because without that, I mean, I wouldn't have done this whole album that's going to be out in a month and a half. Signals from Malibu by Merrell Fankhauser and friends. And there's definitely something all to it, and I applaud all of you that keep exploring this and putting it out there. Yeah, on all the radio shows I've done now, I've been asking people, to tell me their feelings of what they feel when they hear this music. And I don't know if I talked to you since, Janet or Grant, but I was on Dr. Bob Hieronymus's show out in Baltimore.
Okay.
And he played these signals that were recorded by Billy Meyer. It's a famous case. I'm sure Grant knows about it. Yeah. And he recorded it, these sounds that this UFO made that was hovering over his house, and you can even hear his dog barking in the background. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Bob had done his research, and when he was going to have me on, he had recorded those signals, and he played them and compared them to the signals from Malibu. And we were both blown away when he did that. There's this underlying thing that almost sounds like a train on a railroad track going, and then there's a higher pitched message of beeps, beep, 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 over the top. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that right away as being two separate tracks of sound. And they were almost identical in spots. Wow. So if Billy Meyer faked that in 1970, he had some kind of a synthesizer or some musical thing that wasn't invented yet to do that, and how it came out to sound exactly, well, almost exactly like these signals from Malibu now. It's amazing. And I was thinking, honestly, at first, I was thinking, okay, because there's a naval air station not too far from Point Dume in Malibu and Point Magoo along the coast there, I was thinking it's some code that they're doing some kind of submarine activity, out there. And that's what it was. I was thinking it was a Navy. But when Dr. Bob played that for me, it changed my mind. I really believe there's something very different going on there.
Wow. Is there any update on the concert? There was maybe a concert taking place?
Well, I know Michael is trying to arrange that, and the problem is, is crowd control and parking and all of that, because he's got, besides myself, he's got some pretty big names interested in doing it. And one option was to do it at Pepperdine University, because they have a area that has bleachers and can hold about 15,000 people. And then there's another area that kind of adjoins that, where they have the little Malibu fair every year. So I think you could probably get another 20,000 in there. But there's so many permits and, security that would have to be hired extra and everything. But I know he really wants to do it, and he's working on it.
Would they be featuring any UFO speakers or information to tie it in?
Well, he told me that he had talked to Shirley MacLaine and, believe it or not, William Shatner. And I don't know about anybody anybody else in the UFO community, but he really wants to see this happen. Another interesting thing is that in a direct line from where this anomaly is out in the water, up on the mountainside, there's these two like monolithic structures with petroglyphs in them.
Wow.
Ooh.
Wow.
And somehow I feel that is connected with this anomaly that's out in the water. And if it is from a past civilization, that all could make sense. And the thing is that the guy that picked up the radio signals had no idea that there was something under the water out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he thought it was the Navy doing something.
Right.
So I've made a TV show about it now for my Tiki Lounge TV show that's shown out here on the Central Coast, and KCBX Radio interviewed me about it, and we videoed that, and the host, Sal Espana, really did a good job of asking the questions, and we have two videos now that we've made that have the anomaly and some sightings that were sighted there. And we did the two songs, the lead song on the album, Signals from Malibu. We have a video to that and a video to Messages from the Dome. And when the CD comes out, we're going to put those on YouTube.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, let me know.
Can I ask what your band members think about all this stuff?
Well, the band members that are playing with me now I've been playing with some of them since 1980, so they're kind of used to me going out into unexplored regions, so to speak. And when we recorded these two songs, Grant, we all were tingly afterwards, is the only way I can explain it. Wow. And we knew we had done something really different. And, we were just kind of amazed at what we had gotten put down. And I sent it to my contact at Warner Brothers, and he listened to it, and he said it sounded like a sci-fi movie soundtrack, mm-hmm. and that they could present it to the board, which meets every February, to decide what they're going to put out for the upcoming year to get it out before the summer market. But he said they probably wouldn't be able to get it out till May or June. Wow. And so then I presented it to Gonzo Multimedia, the label that I'm on in England, that's put out a lot of great stuff on me. And he said, we'll take it right away and rush it out if you'll let us have it. Wow. So I let them have it, and they've already got all the artwork done, and it's beautiful. They really did a nice job. They've even got a part of me diving off of Maui in between Maui and Kaho'olawe with tanks on, and they put that piece in the booklet inside.
Wow, good for you. I'm glad you're helping make the movement move ahead, the consciousness. You're doing a good job on raising consciousness, I think.
Well, thank you very much. It's I'm glad to be a part of it and keep discovering and learning new things.
Wow.
Is there anything that we can do to help facilitate this concert coming off, or this, whatever this is going to be? Is there anything that listeners can do or we can do to help this process?
Well, at this point, just, I think, email Michael Luckman. His address is nebula2000 or 2002 at gmail.com, and just tell him that we want to give him support. And, I don't know, maybe at some point he'll have to get a petition of people or whatever it takes to convince the city of Malibu to let him do it, because the bands are already all on board. It's just getting a place there that they feel will be safe and they can, have ample parking and crowd control.
Has he got some big bands?
So well, who do you have? Who are they talking to?
Well, this is off the wire now, but he did say besides those speakers that he was talking to, he asked me first, and we were thinking of using my song Calling from a Star as kind of a theme and to promote it. And he's talking to David Bowie and Mick Jagger.
Yeah, I knew he was friends with me. I had a connection with Mick Jagger. I knew that. Right. Yeah, that's the thing. That would almost be like disclosure. That would be like, what the heck is going on? It would be like, it would almost go viral if something like that happened. I hope
exactly.
I hope he can pull it off.
I do too. That'd be fantastic. And I mean, if that happened, I'm sure that unless you went down there 2 weeks ahead and camped out, you wouldn't even be able to get near the place, and probably us musicians will have to be helicoptered in if it really happens.
Wow.
Because I was calling it an alien rock concert, and he dubbed it the Alien Woodstock.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it would be. It would be that revolutionary, I think. Yeah. Wow. It's interesting.
Well, are they going to address their experiences as part of this?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think they'd even have to. I just think the names associated would be, people would just go like a double take, because most people don't really know the connection, like with Jagger and Bowie and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what it basically comes down to. If you take a look at, for example, David Bowie, a lot of the musicians, people say, well, they were drug addicts and stuff. I said, well, yeah, they also led a lot of the social and political movements. Bowie was big time responsible for the gay rights movement. I mean, when Bowie came forward and said that he was gay, that was what gave the impetus to a lot of other people to come forward. So in a lot of ways, they did a lot of stuff, like John Lennon, with the whole dispute about the Vietnam War and the sleep-in thing with Yoko Ono. I mean, these people are very, very sort of prominent people, and they can sort of turn entire civilizations around just by the things they do. They're very, very powerful influences, and I think that's one of the reasons why aliens may be using these people, because they influence this sort of generation that's looking for something new. The generation between, say, 10 and 24 years old, they look to musicians as their heroes, and they're also looking for something to be something in the world and to do something important, that their parents are ruining the world and stuff. And so when a musician comes out and says that they're against war, or that they're for gay rights, or for gay marriage, or for animal rights and stuff like that, which a lot of them were, this changes a lot of people and influences a lot of people down a road to raise consciousness on all sorts of different issues.
That's true. And the fact that both of those musicians we just mentioned, like the Rolling Stones, had 2,000 light years from home. Yeah. Michael would like to have us all do some form of extraterrestrial inviting music, or space music, if you want to call it that, because he feels like that could conjure some UFOs to the concert.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very interesting project, and I really do. It would be something I'd love to be part of in my lifetime.
And that's one of the other things
I'd like to see it.
That Michael Luckman also mentions, and these are all over the internet. How many people who have had the UFO contact who have had UFOs over their concert? The U2, Ozzy Osbourne, Springsteen when he was doing the Obama concert. A lot of UFOs have appeared over a lot of these big musicians' concerts. So they have this connection of stuff might actually appear while they're playing.
That's true. And you know, Jimi Hendrix had, as I mentioned, had a lot of UFO sightings on Maui. In fact, I did a documentary that's on Gonzo. It's called Rainbow Bridge Revisited, where we interviewed some of the cast and crew that were in the original Rainbow Bridge movie. And they talk about 200 people saw this giant UFO in Lahaina one day when they were all out there trying to set up the cameras, and they said the thing was there just floating along for the longest time, and some people were panicking and running indoors, and some people were praying, and it talks about that in Michael's book, and how when they were hiking through the pyramid, I call Haleakala Pyramid, when they were hiking through Haleakala, they saw one hovering there, but they couldn't get the camera off of the burrow and get it running in time to capture it.
Yeah.
Oh, we're out of time. Wow, that was fabulous. Thank you, Merrell. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
And aloha.
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 All right. Good talking to you all.
Wonderful.
Great.
Pleasure.
Hang on. Don't hang up.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.